Grab your encumbrance rules, Wargamers, because today we are looking at how much Wargaming fun one man can fit in a simple box. As usual, we're dealing with the stackable Sterilite boxes. And I gotta be honest with you, I'm getting a little nervous about the strength of this handle because this is a fairly heavy box. I've got quite a bit of lead in here. And of course, when I say lead, I mean it metaphorically. This is the big city. I'm calling it Blankopolis for now because given the subject matter that we're going to be talking about, Riot, I have to be very, very careful so that our wonderful hosts here at the Uses and the Tubeses don't throw me off. So I've got another video that does a full review of the Riot war game, and my next video, we're actually going to play it. Today we're not talking about the game, we're talking about the physics involved and exactly how to stack a whole building, a whole 6mm city into a single box, complete with, check this out, all of the figures that you need. And we'll go through how I put this whole thing together. It's fairly simple. This is simple masonite board that I used for my buildings. And then to start things off, we've got a nice little park. In fine American fashion, we've got an old Sherman tank parked there and a couple of Civil War heroes on the statue. This makes for a great objective for your rioters. But again, we'll talk more about that later. The big thing here is that I've got everything stacked in here really nice and neat. We've got a couple of these with our trees. I decided to need a little more height. Now, these are a little more cartoonish than I like. It's just a simple styrofoam ball. You know, it's a basic toothpick for a tree trunk. You know, nothing groundbreaking here. But by stacking them in there, I can keep them safe. And so I've got a total of 6 of those. And then we get to the actual miniatures themselves. I'll be pulling these out. But as you can see, these are like $1 a piece at your local Walmart. And I can fit 12. I could probably fit more stands of rioters and game pieces into each one of these. But we'll get to those in a minute. As I said, now I have one empty box because I'm not actually going to use this city for only one set of rules for Riot. I'm also going to use it for another game. I'll get rid of that for the glare. And we'll see if you can make out what this is. Probably not if I have the auto zoom off. There we go. See that bad boy? Yeah, hell's gonna come to Tiny Town. That is a van with a turret on top. Unpainted as of yet. These are 6mm scale figures from our good friends at Irregular Miniatures, who are the people responsible for most of the miniatures that we're going to be looking at today. And no, we're not gonna, we don't like that one. Oh, there we go. Look at that guy. What a good looking car. Anyway, it's gonna look even better once I paint it. As I was saying, we can fit, and I had to go back a few times to get these. I've got a total of 6 of those. And as I said, 3 of these slightly larger boxes. These boxes are the, I think they're called fairly useful boxes. Anyway, they're $1 a piece as well. And then, as you can see, the rest of this is going to be our terrain. So this is the hospital, which is St. Drogo's, who is a real saint, by the way. Got an emergency room. And I don't know if this is ever going to come into play, but whatever. It looks like a nice city. We've got our big box store. Every city needs a big box store, regardless of what they tell you, for all your big box needs. Need a little more detailing here in the back. Maybe put a couple of dumpsters there or something to kind of close that up a little bit. It's pretty open. And then because it is 2 levels, you can see I've got additional buildings down low, and we'll look at these real quick before we crack open those miniatures. This was intended to be the police station. I don't know if that comes out in the final wash, but I also have the safer way over here. See if we can zoom in on my little hand-painted logo. As we discussed in a recent video or a previous video, I've got a little doors here in the back, and all my windows are painted basically gray with a little bit of white highlighting. You know, this is an alley back here with some signs and a couple little garbage cans and whatnot to add a little more detail. Hey, there's a mailbox there. And by stacking them one on top of the other, I couldn't do that all the time. But, you know, we've got our 7-Eleven, nice little liquor store with the newspapers, boxes that sell out front. It's called Liquors. I don't know if you're familiar with the zombie game. We've got some literal graffiti here. Again, I painted that on one of my poor man's live streams. And then our downtown area needed a series of shops. So these are just a whole series. You know, you get your pawn shop. I didn't quite go too overboard with, you know, references to intellectual property and media that you've watched. I just went ahead and said, hey, you know what? We've got King Tut's, if you recognize that one. Just your basic hardware store. A couple of awnings to kind of break up the lines there a little bit. And as usual, that second floor is cut off. I did go ahead and paint some of these roofs black to break up the monotony of the gray on gray. Nice little church. These are meant to be flower gardens. I don't know if they turned out so well, but a couple of splashes of color, a little something else. There's a couple of doors there for people that show up late and need to run in. There's your main doors there. Another objective, little apartment complex with a pool out front. Again, that little bit of blue, just that little splash kind of brightens things up a little bit. And then the last set of buildings, this will be the other side of the, you know, call it the downtown. There you go. There's Bob's Burgers. We remember that one. More graffiti there. And a couple of more stores. Griffin Books, my favorite bookstore of all time. Little restaurant. Durando's and Brothers. Great restaurant, College Town. And of course, the Targe. Another little mailbox, you know, it's not much, but it does help break things up a little bit. Had a recommendation, somebody said, you know, you really should have made a template or a stencil for these. It doesn't take long to cut out a stencil. I wish I would have thought of that. It would have cleaned these lines up, made them perfectly straight. But it's too late for that now. And hey, it's, you know, it's kind of hand painted and it's cartoony and stylish. And it's my style, so I regret nothing. So with all of that preamble out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at what our combatants are going to look like. And we'll start with that thin blue line. Are they the good guys? Are they the bad guys? Decide for yourself. Depends on who they're fighting and why. As I mentioned, all of these figures are 6mm figures from Irregular Wargames. There we go. 6 little millimeters right there. It's very simple to paint. It's dry brush blue. Now in this case, I used a couple of different techniques. It's very similar to how you paint any other miniature. With these guys, I primed them black, I dry brushed them white, and then I dry brushed them blue. Because as you can see, there's a whole lot of blue on those guys. Then I went through and I picked out the visors and the shields. And in some cases, they're billy clubs with a little bit of black. Little dry brush with light blue to kind of pick out some of the edges, and then a simple white line across the front of the riot shields. That's it. I gotta tell you, I didn't think that the pack that I bought came with enough figures. Likewise, same thing here with these guys on the horsies. Painted the horsies in a slightly different color. They're painted to a gaming standard, right? They're not going to win any beauty contests, but I'm not trying to win a beauty contest. I'm trying to play some more games here. The pack that I ordered came with 8 stands of these guys, and as you can see, all of my playing pieces are mounted on identical 1-inch bases. Here's a old-timey fire engine. Apparently the city had some budget cuts. But the pack also came with this more modern and sleek and fancy fire engine. Yeah, and I went ahead and painted up the base with a little couple of roads at a bit of an angle. I probably didn't need to base these to a base. You can see that I trimmed off the edges of the casting there so I could squeeze 4 horses on. I just think that having 4 figures per base looks a lot better. It's going to look, once you get it onto your gaming board, I mean, take a look at how those cops just fit right in there, right? There's your 1-inch roads. And I just think that it kind of fills things out. It's going to make it look more like a crowd, which you'll see once we break out the actual crowds. I have a couple of stands of civilians here. And one of the things that I did to help distinguish, now obviously the police are in green. I also have some military forces who are in, the police are in blue. I've got some military forces, and I painted those in green, so you can see, even from a distance, and hopefully this shows up on camera, it's pretty obvious, right? 3 dudes per base for the military, 4 for the police. And even on a camera, a cell phone camera like mine, the difference becomes obvious at arm's length, particularly the green and the blue. And once again, I use the same painting techniques for these guys, where I just primed them black, and then I gave them a dry brush in white, and then brushed them up in solid green. And once I had them all green, for 6mm, you don't need to do a whole lot. You pick out the boots, you pick out the rifles and the faces and the hands, and you're done. Just a little dot, 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 dot. That's all you need to do. And they look pretty sharp down here on your city. Of course, they won't be on the roofs, they'll be down in the streets. What else we got here? The military men come with transports. You can fit 1 base in a truck, and fortunately, I got one of these trucks came, the Irregular Miniatures does that thing where they like to entice you. Hey, you should start playing World War II. Let us send you some examples of what we have. Well, these examples, yeah, a deuce and a half in 2020, probably not particularly relevant. Yeah, okay, one's got dudes, one does not. Whatever. They work great. You can see what they are. You can fit 1 base in each one, and they're largely going to stick to the roads anyway, so that is just fine. Got a couple of tanks here that came with the kit. Remember that there's a lot of different scenarios you can play. Hopefully we don't have to break those out into some kind of a Tiananmen Square situation. Now, with all that said, let's take a look at some of the rioters. And what I did is, I'm going to be honest with you, I had way more rioters than I needed, and I did that on purpose because I knew these guys were fairly gentle. In the large set that I got, these rioters come 2 to a base, but as you can see, this guy's already bent, and there he goes. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of super gluing. Some of these ankles are really fragile. And in a lot of cases, what I did is I cut this in half, and that gave me an extra guy. Now, bear in mind, as you look at all of these rioters here, I've got 12 stands per mob. And you can see I painted these guys largely black with some details picked out in red. Right, a couple of details for their faces and where they're slinging baseball bats around. Where's the one I need to fix? I gotta set that aside so I don't forget. My rioters were all based 5 to a stand, so I'm gonna put them on top of the building here. Again, you've got 3 to a base for the military, 4 to a base for the cops, and 5 to a base for rioters, and then a big crowd for the civilians. There is no scenario that calls for civilians, but you never know. One other thing to be aware of as we move forward is that this kind of black blocky looking boys, in the rules for Riot, every mob has a leader base who takes the lead, obviously, and the rest of the boys kind of fill in the gaps behind. I did 2 things so that you could scan the table and figure out which base is the leader base. And I just picked him right out. So he's got a little placard super glued onto one of the boys. And what did I glue onto this guy? I think I got it backwards. I did. I glued the wrong one on the wrong one. He's got a little piece of French bread. And that's a big mistake. Oh well. We'll call them the bread tube guys, I guess. Because as you can see. Oh, right. The other thing I did to make it obvious that this is the leader is, see the black band around the base? It's a little darker. This guy is perfectly gray. So that's one mob, up to 12 bases. My second mob, I painted with simple pale blue and khaki and kind of random colors. They got a lot more redheads in there. And yeah, so they look a little bit different. And again, if I look at this, you can see, where's my leader? He's got, here we go. So we'll put these down, and you can see right off the bat, he's got a little placard that says, no. He's also got a darker edging, what do they call that? The bevel around the base, whereas the rest of them will have just a pure gray base. So you'll recognize on camera that he's the leader. And then my third, I said, hey, you know what? We're equal opportunity here when we depict these things. So these boys with the yellow jackets are, you know, they just, well, a couple of things. Those of you that are following the news, closer than the news want you to follow, will recognize the yellow jackets from their parties that they're throwing in the streets of Paris and around the country of France. And largely the reason I did that is because it provides a lot of contrast. So when you've got multiple mobs running around a city, you can take one quick look at the streets and say, aha, see the difference? One set's darker than the other. It's pretty obvious. I don't know why. These guys should be carrying the placard with the bread. These guys should be carrying the placard with the, it's just the no. It's the red circle with a line through it. Keep things, probably should have been a raised fist, but I just didn't want to paint a raised fist. The last things that we should look at here before we move on, well, the last things that we'll move on to look at, I should say, are a little bit more window dressing. There's one other faction. The game is a solo game, but it does have rules for the press. And the press can have vehicles that they drive around in. Now, these vehicles without bases, these are just set dressing. To scale. We can fill the streets with cars. I don't know that they'll have any effect on the rules. We may have them block movement. So if we want to change the game a little bit, we can say, hey, you know what? We're going to park a car right there, and now pedestrians, no vehicles can move through it because it's blocked. Pedestrians can move through it, but not vehicles. That'll kind of change the terrain a little bit. And as you can see, it's just a nice little selection of Jeeps and sedans, and they've got one, you know, I got one van. The other vans I went ahead and painted up. We got a Channel 4 news van, so that's a transport that these newsies can tool around in. And then I have one others. For you older gentlemen, there you go. Just in case anybody riots because of the turkeys thrown out of a helicopter, good old Les Nessman is going to be on the case. And it's pretty obvious to tell the difference between a news reporter, because it doesn't have a whole lot of figures on it. I painted the base in a slightly darker color, so there's your comparison between the civilians and military cops, and here is a couple of stands of protesters. So it's pretty obvious to tell. And there's a couple of Jeeps and a couple of vans for the newsboys. And I don't know if you can see that. I like to think, now the intention here was to give this Jeep the Jurassic Park treatment. You tell me if it worked. We got comments below. Then there's the last thing, because we're talking about riots, and because these dissatisfied people are exercising their right to peaceable assembly, that may mean scoring victory points for setting buildings on fire. And the scenario that I have, they want to set 15 buildings on fire. Unfortunately, the kit only came with 8 of the, I think 7 or 8 of the fire markers, so I went ahead and bought a couple of those fire markers from Litco. You also have the opportunity, I should say, these guys have the opportunity to loot buildings, and that's what these counters are for. Zoom right in on that, and it's just a little random collection of, well, loot, appropriately enough, I don't know what half of these are. One of these things, this looks like an ice chest. This looks like just corrugated wood. This looks like a treasure chest. This looks like but it's completely out of scale to the people. So, it's really just a way to show that, hey, this building is now in disarray. It's been looted, and these fine, peaceable demonstrators are going to move on to a new building to loot. The more of those you build up, the more you lose. As I've said in the past, these guys are run by the game's AI. And Riot itself is agnostic. It's tongue-in-cheek. Look at this guy. He doesn't look too serious. We're not going to take it too serious either. We're going to goof, and we're going to decide who's the good guys, who's the bad guys as we go forward. And we're not going to use any real-world situations, although because we're cheeky, we may throw some oblique references in here and there. So something to look forward to. Anyway, it all gets slapped into that box and then tucked into the closet for months on end before I feel the need to do some more wargaming. I forgot to mention, these are simple green scrubbers. You can get them at any grocery store. Glued in place, dry brushed yellow, and then a little bit of bushes along the side there. And as you can see, I did pre-measure these sidewalks so that we can fit plenty of bases right along them. And there you have it. Wargaming in a box. Doesn't have to be complicated. Doesn't have to be big. You don't have to fill up entire rooms. One little box is all you need. So, stay tuned. We're going to play a Riot next game. We're going to throw together some scenarios and have a good time. In the meantime, here, we'll show what this tree would look like if it was blocking the road. It adds a little bit of vertical height to the proceedings, and just one more thing to kind of get in the way and make everything look a little more interesting. So, until next time, until we roll some dice together, go forth, have some fun with your wargaming. Don't take it too seriously. Make your terrain yours. Add a little bit of yourself. Use lots of in-jokes that nobody but you and your best friends gets. Doesn't have to be complicated. Unclench, have a great time, and until we throw those dice, I'm praying for you.